lot has happened.
A lot has happened.
Yeah.
History continues to be interesting.
History continues to be interesting. Do you know where it's really difficult to get a flight right now?
Venezuela,
Caracas.
así imposible.
Yeah. Unless you're on a military transfer of some kind. My buddy Joey and I were looking the other day trying to find if there was anyone flying there. We could not find any domestic carrier going from the US.
Impossible.
Next to impossible. Maybe if you,
Impossible. Where?
right, right. Maybe if you went down to Brazil, even there, I'm not sure. So I've got some friends in South America. I'll have to ask them what the general tone is.
Interesting.
What was your reaction to the news about Maduro's removal from his capital?
Oh, surprise. I didn't think the U.S. government would take such a straightforwardly aggressive action.
Mm-hmm.
Straightforwardly, but surgically aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
A decision was made not to attempt what we attempted in Iraq. This temptation, in my opinion, should be firmly resisted.
Mm-hmm.
And not what we had to do in the case of Japan, and to a lesser degree Germany. So, Japan and to a lesser degree Germany, reconstruction of a devastated country.
Uh-huh.
Iraq, replacement of a whole governing class structure. We elected in this case just to remove the number one man and his wife.
And his wife.
Yeah. And this is much like
Is there a precedent for
there's all
this?
kinds of precedent for it. I mean, there's a great deal of, there's a great deal of, well, the due processes of international law have not been followed. International law does not have an abundance of due processes. Strategy is not an episode of Law and Order. Episode of Law and Order before I watched the first few seasons of Law and Order back in the 90s, really liked it. So we all got used to this. Detectives Briscoe and Green, they have to get a search warrant from Judge Rumblegut. And after they get the search warrant from Judge Rumblegut, they can then proceed to get an arrest warrant from Judge Fuzzyface.
Yep.
And due process is followed. No, you do not do that in international affairs. So there's abundant precedent. Many people forget this. I saw that Jeremy Corbyn, former British Labour leader, was in high dudgeon about this. British did it much more bloodily in the Second Afghan War. First Afghan War, 19th century, of course. First Afghan War, the British made the foolish mistake of trying to remodel Afghanistan. Utter catastrophe, massive revolt. Their isolated force in Kabul had to try and retreat out and basically didn't make it out. Second Afghan War.
So the American exit from Afghanistan was not the first time there have been disastrous retreats from Afghanistan by imperial powers.
In our case, it was an entirely elective chaotic retreat. It didn't have to be the mess it was.
No, it did not.
That was unforgivable. But Second Afghan War, 1870s, about which I have a board game, imagine this. But Second Afghan War, the British made a very deliberate decision. No, this time we're not try to run the damn country. This time, we're just going to march in. We're going to blow away everyone who tries to stand in our way. We're going to remove the current ruler. We're going to blow up some stuff. Prove you don't mess with Britain. And we're going to leave.
This was called Butcher and Bolt.
Butcher and Bolt. Don't try to add to the empire. It was very clear. The government in London was vehemently persuaded that it had more empire than it could conveniently handle, and had a difficult time convincing some of their local lieutenants and viceroys not to, convincing them that they shouldn't be behaving aggressively. We've got all the empire we can deal with. Thank you very much. And some places are hard to deal with than others. You don't have to exercise power directly and try to control how a country develops some circumstances that may be necessary, Japan after World War II, very often all you need to do is show that we're here, we're to be taken seriously. We're not going to try to run your country, but you don't make trouble for us. We did this very successfully with Gaddafi,
Mm-hmm.
who made a lot of trouble for a long time. But then after we nearly blew up his family, frankly, people's memories are very short. All the people who are huffing and puffing. Uh,
This was in 2011.
oh, much earlier. No, much earlier.
Oh.
Gaddafi behaving for quite a while before the Arab Spring, which turned out to be one of the most sustained exercises in BS in geopolitical history. Part of that government of Libya. There was unrest in Libya. Incomprehensibly, the United States decided that we were going to step in with our air power through NATO as sort of a very flimsy loincloth
Oh my God.
to disguise the sheer nakedness of U.S. aggression.
Oh, can we make that the
In the
title of the episode?
Seriously, then everybody knew it was the U.S.
Right.
NATO, though, as the thin loincloth, this was an exercise in raw power, and what did it lead to? So far, this one is much more surgical, not trying to remove the whole leadership class.
Mm.
There's a hope that already the Nobel Prize winner has returned to Venezuela. And there's a hope that there can be a healthy political development after this. There's no guarantee.
Mm.
The point of the exercise is not to control Venezuela. The point of the exercise is to do what the British did in Afghanistan and what we had done successfully with Libya before the grotesquerie Hillary Clinton's Libya policy. What we had done successfully with Libya, what the British had done, Second Afghan War. Simply say, hello, we're here. Do not mess with us. We're not going to try to control your country. Don't mess with us, however. Don't be buying Russian armaments. Don't be playing footsie with Iranian-sponsored terrorists. Don't be playing little games with narco-traffickers. Whoever the heck runs your country, bear these things in mind and we'll get along fine.
Yeah, I think that's what I meant when I said precedent of the the ability to remove just the top guy and then get out.
Well, in the case of Libya, we didn't remove Gaddafi, darn near blew him up,
Mm.
blew up part of his family. Yeah, where's the outrage about that? That's all forgotten, distant past for modern observers, contemporary observers. Anything past 25 years is the distant past.
Do you think this is because to a certain observer class, anything coming out of Trump's administration must be criticized?
Well, that's certainly true, but I think it's broader than that.
Oh, how is it broader?
Anything done by the United States, anything done aggressively by the United States must be bad. This is why, back to the time of the Korean War, an old tradition with a certain sort of opinion in the West. By the time of the Korean War, there were people who would rather make apologetics for the North Korean regime, one of the most unpleasant on earth, than to support the American war effort in Korea.
Mm.
Had to be wrong. Why?
Because
I really answer that very clearly, but after a pause to try and find words, they'll say, colonialism, that's it, colonialism. We have to be against colonialism because my baptismal promise was I reject Satan and all his empty props and all his empty pomps and colonialism. So help me God.
Okay, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that that there's a greater desire to criticize American aggression.
Oh, yes.
But we have to, do you think that goes hand in hand with an attitude that we must help any nation that is being aggressed upon
Oh,
by
just help in general.
people we don't like?
A friend of mine who worked in Balkans, of the 2000s, he said that 2000s, 2010s, he commented the two sentences he heard most often were, "Why are the Americans doing this?" and "Why don't the Americans do something?" It's expected that we do something. And if we do something, it has to be wrong. And this includes people in the United States. It's a knee-jerk. It is almost that automatic. The old doctor taps the knee and your leg kicks a little bit. It's almost that automatic.
We should be in there helping. Okay.
We're not helping the right way.
We're right. Whoa. Did that attitude exist prior to 1940?
That's good. Some degree, the attitude, a little bit of excuse behind it. To some degree, the attitude grew out of the observed behavior of the United States at the end of the 19th century and in the first part of the 20th century. So I will say that much. Our routine dispatch of the Marines to places in Central America to make sure they had regimes of which we approved. I don't think this is in the same kind of category because for two reasons. One, Maduro's international activity was unacceptable. His connection with enemies of the United States, his playing around with terrorist organizations, more than toying with narco trafficking. I don't think in the same category. Nonetheless, the United States clumsily and naively threw its weight around late 19th, early 20th century. The war in Cuba against Spain, that made very little sense. Taking over the Philippines, why are we taking over the Philippines? The only excuse we had was if we don't, somebody else will. It's not overly persuasive.
Even if it's true.
Even if it's true. It probably was true in the context of the early 20th century. Interventions in Mexico that were, the vulgar phrase is half-assed. Enough to irritate the Mexicans, not enough to do very much. Whether it was occupying Veracruz in opposition to Huerta, or whether it was having John J. Pershing pursue Pancho Villa across the hills and deserts of Chihuahua. World War I. What did we think we were doing in World War I? And afterwards, we left a very, this burst of patriotism, I think somewhat artificially generated patriotism. And afterwards, a very sour taste. What did we just accomplish? President Wilson's phrase was make the world safe for democracy. It doesn't seem very safe for democracy right now.
100 years later.
Well, 100 years later, the sour taste was like 2 years later.
Right.
As we contemplated the Russian Civil War, the establishment of Bolshevik dictatorship, communist uprising in Germany defeated but terrible instability, communist uprising in Hungary defeated but terrible instability, war in Turkey, ethnic cleansing of the Greeks, further ethnic cleansing of the Armenians, Irish uprising, chaos in India, civil war in China, strange behavior from Japan. The world is not safer for democracy.
The world's not safe for anything. Is democracy particularly fragile?
Well, yes and no. Democracy is a hardy, how should I put this? It's receded and grown many times in European history. I suppose you can argue about definition of terms, but that aside, what I would call democracy, kind of broadly defined, I think it's made many appearances in Western history. I don't think it can be kept down forever. So in one sense, it's very tough. In another sense, it's fragile. It requires, absolutely requires, political and social stability. It cannot thrive without political and social stability. Uh, so in the aftermath of World War One, it died out in all the places that did not have political and social stability.
Mm-hmm.
I think we did this. You might remember. You wouldn't. You're too young. So you might remember we did this in Iraq. We were very naive. I don't. Do you remember people that they had their
The purple thumbs.
purple thumb? I voted. Yeah. Well done.
Thumbs? And index. Yeah. Index fingers.
Index finger.
Yeah.
But democracy could thrive, and that can in the conditions of social, political chaos verging on, sometimes more than verging on, civil war. So democracy is always there in the West. I think post-World War II, in many ways, the reconstruction of Japan was the more impressive task because there really wasn't an indigenous tradition of democracy, but in Germany there was.
Mm-hmm.
It's always there in the Western heritage. But in one sense, it's very durable. In another sense, it is fragile. Not because it's particularly vulnerable to external aggression, but because it is terribly vulnerable to internal social and political instability.
Ah, that's a good distinction. It's not that democracies collapse under invasion.
They fight hard.
Right.
Fight hard. The America's mobilization in World War II is one of the marvels of history. Democracies, once they resolve, have a capacity for action for concerted action, that puts dictatorships to shame.
Mm-hmm. Because democracies, if democracy is demonstrating concerted effort, it means that pretty much everyone's bought in.
Exactly. That's very dangerous.
Mm.
So democracy is, unless odds are overwhelming, democratic states are strong against external aggressors.
Mm-hmm.
Their weakness is their vulnerability to internal chaos.
Ah, because it's hard to hold coordinated, fair elections
Yes.
in any sort of chaotic environment.
People are competitive. So there's sort of, I think of it as sort of a natural entropy. It takes deliberate effort to do building maintenance. If you don't do that effort, the building falls apart. The natural tendency of a building is to fall apart.
Ain't that the
As
truth?
you know,
As I,
better than most.
yes.
The natural tendency of a democratic political system is to disintegrate. It takes deliberate, constant effort to keep elections honest and stable. Deliberate, constant effort. Without that effort, elections will become, people play, they want to win. And they can tell themselves they want to win for highly noble, virtuous, world transformative, heartwarming purposes. They want to win. So they're going to cheat.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not constantly on the alert, your democratic system becomes poisoned by various forms of political corruption.
More easily than a monarchical system or an oligarchy. An oligarchy is immune to certain.
No system is immune to corruption. Sort of the kingdom of heaven. But elections provide opportunities for gamesmanship. And our American history has many examples of this.
Mm-hmm.
We have to admit.
Mm-hmm.
People disagree on exactly who said it. Some people attribute it to Boss Tammany. It's not clear that he said it, but he certainly practiced it. Boss Tammany of New York. really matters is not who votes, but who counts the votes. Yeah. The famous quip that in Chicago the rule is vote early, vote often.
Right. Vote from the grave if you have to. Yeah.
If you have to. Uh, we've seen that enough of that in our own country. This is a real thing. It takes constant work to keep that at bay. So corruption, but also instability, getting the mob out. Democracies are more vulnerable to sliding into mob rule.
Mm-hmm.
From the horrible history of lynchings in the South to more recent displays of mobocracy with Black Lives Matter and mostly peaceful protests. I think democracies are more vulnerable to that. Other regimes are more likely to crack down on mob activity as soon as it starts. Just democracy, we want to let the people protest. And if this is a very disciplined group. Like, honestly, pro-life protests are very disciplined.
Mm-hmm.
They even clean up after themselves.
There have been some startling images of their demonstrations versus demonstrations by other groups.
A friend of mine with his, at the time, preteen daughter, taken her on a couple of pro-life marches, and is on vacation during the BLM era, mercifully short-lived. He was on vacation during that, and he was at one of those, they happened to be near one of those protests, and his preteen daughter made the remark, oh my, that's not like our protests.
Mm.
They're nasty. They don't clean up after themselves, actually break things, actively break things. But depending on exactly who's in charge, in democracy, they can be very slow to notice when that line between protest and mobocracy has been crossed.
Mm-hmm.
Mobocracy is when mob influences or even controls government decisions. We can't do X because then people will riot. That's not democracy. That's mob. It can't be accepted. Can't be accepted.
An oligarchy or a strong monarchy is more attuned to protests because
Put in the mob.
mm,
Louis XVI was overthrown in part because he was a nice guy. So when the mob assaulted the Tuileries Palace, he ordered his troops to hold fire. Louis XIV would not have ordered his troops to hold fire. Napoleon Bonaparte emphatically would not have ordered his troops to hold fire. No form of government can tolerate a mob.
mm,
Democracies in particular are vulnerable because democracies have to believe in the right of people to protest. There are various forces, sometimes quite cynical forces, that want to move that protest into mob rule. Most crowds are not disciplined. January 6th, case in point. Most crowds are not disciplined. Again, pro-life record is so impressive. You might remember the one year when, desperate to find some example of misbehavior at a pro-life march, the glorious American press picked on one teenager who supposedly had an inappropriate facial expression.
right. Yeah. The wrong kind of smirk.
Yeah, inappropriate face. Imagine this: a teenager has an inappropriate facial expression. Pathetic, but the American establishment media is pathetic. I agree with that critique.
That family sued
With good
the
reason.
first news outlet to carry that image.
Yes.
For what? It was a lot of money. I want to say it was 85 million.
The news outlet's behavior was inexcusable. Broadcasting the kid's face all over the country and labeling him as some sort of menace to civilization because he had an inappropriate expression on his face.
Mm.
Anyway, pro-life marches have a very solid record. They're a disciplined group.
Mm-hmm.
Most crowds, even if the organizers have no ill intent, most crowds are not well-disciplined. And if you have organizers with ill intent, it's far too, it's really sort of the classic, it became to be a cliche in the old Westerns, but it's a cliche rooted in reality. In the U.S. South, we're tending to be more racially directed, and the U.S. West, the mob takes over. Sometimes because there's legitimate frustration, sometimes not. But the mob takes over, it's never good. It's the death of democracy. The only response when the mob takes over is temporary, hopefully, temporary martial law, temporary suspension of democracy until, again, democracies require stability, social and political stability. Mob takes over, at the very least, there has to be a suspension.
Because there's no stability, so there can be no exercise of democracy.
Democracy needs that stability more than other systems.
Mm. Even though it's sort of, democracy is sort of like putting an adolescent behind the wheel of a car. You have to let it happen if the teenager is going to learn to drive, right? If you want the good thing, but you've taught him, you have to take the risk.
So that's what I mean by the stability. If you have the stability, political and social stability, and a good constitution. So to go with your analogy, teenager has been duly instructed.
Right.
There's social stability, social and political stability, and a good constitution. James Madison was quite convinced of this. Without a good constitution, democracy will blow itself up. And I think the first French Republic is a
demonstration of that fact.
Classic demonstration of that. Poorly designed constitution. Our constitution basically still the Constitution of 1787. That's a pretty good record. A well-designed constitution. When I say well-designed, I don't mean the most rigorous. Most states have much longer constitutions than the federal constitution. And most state constitutions are fairly poor. Federal constitution is, I don't remember who wrote this. I didn't invent the phrase myself. I just can't give due credit right now. Someone called it a minimalist masterpiece. It says just enough to be effective. Doesn't try to say too much. Unlike, for example, the Wyoming Constitution, which says just enough about everything to produce chaos.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We got to get Lloyd Larson back on to talk about that. What do you think happens next in Venezuela if the United States maintains a strict policy of we want to deal with your leaders in order to, frankly, pressure you to treat us well and our interests well, but we're not trying to structure your government.
Right. My own feeling is that we should be a step looser than that.
Step looser. Okay.
Just to say, we're not going to try to control your country. Certainly not going to try to say who will rule your country. In this case, we did say who's not going to rule it. We're not going to try to take over. We're not going to try to control your policy in any particular direction. Not going to try and control it. Just remember, we're here. And there's stuff with which we will not put up, with which we will not put. There are things we will not tolerate. Know this. And if things are done that we cannot tolerate, that are a threat to our security, we'll take action. Now, other side of the coin, if you're willing to go further than just refraining from these nasty things, if you're really willing to play ball, we can talk goodies.
We have goodies.
We have goodies for you. Really good goodies. So Your choice. Your choice. You can continue at basically your current course, and we're not going to strike again as long as you don't bring in Russian and Chinese military people and things, as long as you don't play with terrorists, and as long as you don't sponsor narco traffic. If you really want to do well, change your current policies. Play ball with us. We've got some goodies, and we can have a mutually profitable arrangement. Carrot and stick.
Carrot and stick.
Old-fashioned carrot and stick.
Do we have examples besides Libya of a leader being removed? It's just the one leader or
Move, Daffy. 2011 was a fiasco. What we did earlier was enough of a strike that he got scared and pulled back from his sponsorship of terrorism against the United States. He didn't remove him, he scared the heck out of him. Darn near killed him.
Sure.
Without congressional approval, I might say.
Well, okay, so that's perfect. That's a great segue. That's what I wanted to ask about next. Some people are saying that this was an act of war. Can you comment?
Well, of course it was an act of war.
Okay.
Clearly.
Okay. Some people then take that admission and then say, well, the executive is behaving inappropriately because they are conducting acts of war without a declaration of war from Congress.
Where is this written? That all acts of war require a declaration of war.
I don't know.
So, to choose an example that's not necessarily morally grand by any means, but did the United States government, did the executive obtain an act of Congress authorizing military action against the Sioux in 1876? No. When Woodrow Wilson sent Marines to occupy Veracruz because of Huerta's bizarre behavior in 1914, was there a declaration of war? No. When Woodrow Wilson sent John J. Pershing cascading over Chihuahua, chasing Pancho Villa, was there a declaration of war? No. Various occasions in the 1920s when there was U.S. Marine interventions in Central America, was there a congressional declaration of war? No. Continue on the list. Santo Domingo, 1965, declaration of war? No. North Korea, different issue. The Korean War, no congressional declaration of war. Let's take a look at that. I'll take a look at that a little bit later. I think we're dealing with two kinds of military activity. There are two kinds of war, if you will. There's a war that is a quick action that has to be done speedily and stealthily. The strike on Gaddafi. Was there a congressional declaration of war? No. The strikes against the Bosnian Serbs in the 1990s to break the siege of Sarajevo, was there a declaration of war? No. The strikes in Kosovo, was there in the 1990s again, was there a declaration of war? No.
So where is this question arising?
It's absolutely enormous.
Is this an argument that's cooked up and then spread mimetically through people who simply want to criticize American action?
Well, there are those who always criticize American actions, period. But then there are those, it's just the natural, we're the opposition, therefore we must oppose. If it was our guy, we wouldn't be opposing. A military operation like this depends on secrecy.
Yep.
And speed. There's no way that something is going to be secret or speedy if it's presented over the bloviating body known as the United States Congress. Anything you present to Congress, you will present to the entire literate world. In fact, these days, over the literate world. Anything you present to Congress is going to be presented to the whole world that's paying attention. So, Advantage surprise, completely lost. Speed. Anything you present to Congress, the action is going to be weeks away, months away, months away. If Senator Foghorn decides to launch a filibuster, it's going to be months. Action's going to be months away. If you're in a situation where action needs to be secret and fast, you don't consult Congress. Just what it has to be. There's a difference between act of war and state of war.
Okay.
Act of war is quick. It's done. State of war is extended and requires a national effort.
Mm-hmm.
State of war does require congressional approval. The executive cannot on his own commit the country to a state of war, which he kind of did in Korea. I have reservations about that. I think it basically good cause, but that wasn't a quick in and out. We slid into Vietnam, vague congressional approval. It turned out to be a many-year adventure. That's more a state of war, especially because we're drafting people. So I make a distinction between active war and state of war. It's absurd. I'm going to say that, absurd, to think that every act of war needs congressional approval. Some acts of war need to be speedy and stealthy. But a state of war requiring a national effort, an extended effort, that does require congressional approval.
As always, it's the distinctions that need to be drawn before anything else.
Act of war versus state of war. But huge precedent. The president does not need congressional approval for acts of war. There's far too much weighty precedent for that.
You told me a time of George Washington leading several battalions of the Continental Army in order to essentially face down a fomenting
What's the Continental Army?
rebellion.
His first term, the Continental Army is almost completely dissolved.
Okay.
But yes, he mobilized militia into federal service
Okay.
to suppress the whiskey uprising in western Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
There was no fighting, as it turned out.
Right.
It was Washington's way of making clear that the executive would take the strongest possible action to uphold federal law.
Uh-huh.
I
Interesting.
might add, as long as I'm on a roll, that the initial actions of the Civil War were undertaken by President Lincoln without congressional approval. Simply asserted, reasonably asserted, that in the face of an emergency, the executive may undertake warlike actions on his own authority as commander-in-chief.
Well, and so that's where I get a little cautious. It seemed to me that even Rubio's comments in the wake of this incident in Caracas, it seemed to me that Rubio's comments about this being a law enforcement action supported by military personnel, rather than something like what you just said, like, yep, this is an act of war. We are not going into what you call a state of war. It seemed to me that Rubio, at least, was tacitly admitting the premise, which is the executive should not be conducting a war without congressional approval. But you think he's wrong in that?
Far too many episodes. Ronald Reagan, Grenada in 1983, George Bush, Panama, 1989. Earlier episodes, in considerable number, actions against East Asian pirates in the 1840s. Far too many examples for act of war that is limited in scope and duration, responding to a convergent necessity
An acute crisis of some
acute
kind.
crisis, and again, limited in scope and intensity. Act of war. Executive, chief executive, commander in chief can authorize his existing authority because demanding congressional approval would be counterproductive.
Sure.
Things that go to hell in the 3 months that Congress is discussing.
Right.
And
Yeah.
certainly the possibility of secret, quick action, of a secret action. The whole world will know.
What we're thinking about.
That's what I'm thinking of. State of war is something different. That's a distinction I would make. Congress alone can declare that a state of war is such that there's an extended national effort.
Right. Padre, if you just swing that mic just a little bit closer to you. Yeah, you were just drifting away from it. And then if you just turn it,
Sure.
perfect. Um, well, and that touches upon something else that I wanted to pick your brain about. We've talked in the past about how Lyndon Johnson presided over a very robust Congress in the 50s.
Yes, he did. Presiding over the Senate with great glee.
I think you've said in the decades since the real power in the nation of Congress has been slowly watered down.
I think so.
Can you walk us through some of the major causes and markers of that? I mean, is there stuff that happened in the 50s that never could have happened in the 80s, that never could have happened in the 2000s, where we see that degradation?
The dramatic decrease in bipartisan activity in Congress.
Okay.
So the two parties had always been and still are coalitions.
Mm-hmm.
So they always had multiple factions. And it used to be fairly normal for factions within one party to cooperate with factions within the other party. There was also party discipline, but there's quite a bit of crossing party lines.
Okay.
For specific actions. In the years since then, although both parties remain coalitions, they are, to a dangerous degree, coalitions that define themselves by opposition to.
Those guys.
Yeah. To use a medieval example, I have to say something medieval.
Well, we'll get to the medieval
Something medieval.
discussion.
Watch the Ghibellines. When these two Italian parties started out, 13th century, they stood for fairly definite things. By the time you get into the 14th century, it's impossible to determine what the Guelphs stand for, except being against the Ghibellines, and what the Ghibellines stand for, except being against the Guelphs. And that is a very similar situation today, unfortunately. Both parties are still coalitions with different interests, but they cannot reach out to anyone on the other party because the only unifying thing for Republicans is that we're against the Democrats. And the only unifying thing for Democrats is that we're against the Republicans. It's a rare man in the modern Congress, I have to say, Senator Fetterman. It's a rare man who's willing to do what was not at all uncommon in the 1950s and cooperate with people from the other party. But it's rare. So that has made Congress progressively more ineffective. So in order for things to happen, people rely more and more on the executive. Congress also has procedural games. The stupid, in my opinion, the stupid procedural game the Senate has about the filibuster. Because these procedural games in which congressmen and senators take excessive delight, things are slow. Congress, slow and inefficient. So if you want something done, you go to the executive. The tendency has been, it certainly didn't start with Trump. It's escalated under Trump, but I believe it's escalated under every president since Eisenhower. If you want something done, you go to the executive branch. If you want something obstructed, you go to the judicial branch.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to generate noise, you go to Congress. That's a little unfair. That's been the direction things are going.
But increasingly less unfair.
Increasingly less unfair.
Yeah.
more and more the ill-fated and perfectly asinine antics of January 6th. This wasn't insurrection because everybody with an ounce of intelligence knows that power is not exercised from Capitol Hill. All of Capitol Hill is a stage, and all the men and women there are merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. Some of them need to have much earlier exits.
Than they in fact do.
They in fact do. It's a stage.
I'm wondering.
Increasingly a stage. Now that's an exaggeration, but that is the direction in which things have been going for decades.
I'm wondering if there is an example that you have in mind of something that Johnson, say, pushed through in the 50s, that majority leaders couldn't get done, the type of thing which majority leaders couldn't have.
No, his real pushing
shepherded through
was president. Even then, to really push through a legislative agenda required the executive branch.
Okay.
In Lyndon Johnson's case, an executive who knew Congress well, especially the Senate. But even that, really to push through a legislative agenda that required an active president. I remember being deeply scandalized. First time I heard an educated Englishman describe the American Constitution as an elective monarchy. He used that expression in the 70s. I read it in the 80s when I was a teenager. Yeah, old Alistair Cooke, rest his soul. But he was onto something then, and I think it's become increasingly the case. Now, at the very beginning, John Adams thought it was an elective monarchy. Famously, my brother fooled himself by having a discussion about what the proper title of the president should be. And George Washington very firmly said, just Mr. President. Thank you. So I think the potential for the presidency to be an elective monarchy has been there from the beginning. Increasingly, that potential has been realized. Increasingly, Congress has become ineffective. It'd be an exaggeration. I have exaggerated. It'd be an exaggeration to say completely ineffective, but still, that's the direction.
So it's not so much that the executive, the judicial, has cold powers, clawed power away from Congress. Congress has just become in the habit of spinning its wheels more and more.
Yes. Yeah. Become more and more necessary for the executive branch to take action.
Right.
And to a lesser degree, the judicial branch.
Right.
Basically, if you want something done, you go to the executive. If you want something obstructed, go to the judicial.
Right. And try to get some judge to say, this cannot be done.
If you want theater, you go to Capitol Hill.
I love it. Tom, what else is on the headlines? We were mentioning a couple different stories before we went on.
The Somalians.
Oh, the Somalians. The Somalians in Somalia or the Somalians somewhere else?
Minnesota.
In Minnesota.
Brief.
Have you been following that story, Padre?
Unhappily, I've been following it a little bit.
Okay.
It's not a happy story.
Tom, you've been following it pretty closely, right?
Yeah, I listened to the guy who uncovered the story, Nick Shirley.
Okay.
He was on Patrick by David the other day.
Okay.
And so apparently what happened exactly was Nick was invited by a local who had been tracking all the stuff that was happening there for a couple of years.
The guerrilla journalist.
Yeah.
That's quite a character.
And this is in the Twin Cities? This is like in St. Paul or in Minneapolis, or is it statewide?
I think it's unfortunately statewide.
Okay.
Wherever, it might be closer to Minneapolis if this is happening.
Okay.
So this guy, David, that showed Shirley what was happening. They had all the paperwork and documents. So they just went up to all these daycares, knock and ask, hey, can we hear about what your programs are? And they couldn't give any answers. There were no kids. They'd ask locals in town, have you seen any kids at these daycares? I'm like, well, no, not in 10 years.
Not in 10 years?
So these are daycares with signs out front, websites, presumably, advertising of some kind, but no actual children.
No children.
Oh.
So they look up the history of these businesses, and they can see how much federal funding's gone to each one. But they are operating essentially as a fraudulent business because they're not open for business.
Yeah, they're not in fact rendering the service which they receive funding.
Yes.
The federal government has programs that give money to daycares for the care of the children of federal employees, or just underprivileged families, things of that nature.
Yes.
Okay,
So
so subsidized daycare,
Yes.
so that working class people can work.
Very clearly at this point was very clearly a poorly planned, poorly designed.
Mm.
yeah, so they just walk through these buildings. A lot of them are just office buildings, and each corridor is another daycare on the door.
Oh, these are all different registered corporations or LLCs of some kind, that says. Right. Yeah. Rainbow Daycare, Young Start Daycare. Yeah. Child Star Daycare, just at each door.
Each door.
Okay. And so the business, if you can call it that, was applying for whatever paperwork needed to be applied and filed in order to get your corporation to be eligible for some grant.
Entirely without supervision.
The grant money was given out without,
Entirely without supervision.
no one actually showed up to see, let me see your daycare.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
I should have,
don't
you hear about these crimes where you think, man, I could have done that.
What does it profit a man to gain? Child care center in Somalia.
Right. Yeah. What does it profit a man to gain a yacht if he loses his soul? Yeah.
got caught so bad that they had a press conference of all these people, these hardworking Somalians that are trying to run a daycare. And they come on this press conference. And the first thing they say is, fraud is bad, but, and then they lose their minds because they just realize they confess to the fraud. And then it keeps getting worse. Every time they try to do this, it gets worse and worse.
There was a press conference in which certain community leaders came on and said, fraud is bad, but, and then they realized, oh, if we're the ones saying but, we're now in a position of having to defend fraud.
So, Tell from the FBI starts getting out information he can. Bondi starts getting information. And within 2 days, ICE shows up and the FBI is there and they're knocking on doors and like, can you tell us about your business? So
Specifically, where are the children?
for all the children, it gets better. So then these daycares are now offering to pay kids to come at their daycare when the raids are happening so they don't look fraudulent.
Wow.
It gets better.
So child labor is back. Come and play. Come and play at our playground, and we'll give you the goodies. Like, hey, kid, get in my van. I got candy. Get in my van, and I'll take you to my daycare.
They were offering to pay these kids $1,500 a day.
15, which is an indication of how much these kids and how much these kids are worth.
They've done a rough estimate of how much fraud has gone through the Somalian community alone.
Alone. That's important.
Upwards to $9 billion.
Because they're the only people doing it.
Now, this has caused everyone is like, oh, they've been caught. So now all these people from different states are calling up, hey, there's a building down here. I know they have like 50 truck companies and apartment complex. Also foreigners that are running these things. So it's kind of thrown the box open and with good effect because now Tim Walz, who's the governor of Minnesota, has decided to not run for re-election in 26.
And the Republic rejoices.
Mm-hmm.
You won't let him forget it.
So
Well, that can't
This is $9 billion of taxpayer money. Can we bring Doge back?
Doge is there.
Doge is there.
It's just Musk isn't running it right.
Musk kind of shot himself in the foot. Well, I mean, it's a two-edged trade, right? On one hand,
Precisely so. It's much the same to be said of the president.
right, right.
Pledged.
Yep. On one hand, you get stuff done. On the other hand, it's just hard for you to play with others.
Hard to stop.
The Somalians could have talked to Musk, and Musk probably could have populated a couple of daycares for them.
That's too easy. In other words, when a fraud is that easy to carry out, it will metastasize.
Mm-hmm.
More people will be drawn to it.
Right. Word will get around. This is so easy to do.
Yes.
Right. And word will get around that if I'm doing it, that doesn't prevent you from doing it because the dollars are from the outside, right? So it's not like
Without any supervision or oversight.
right. It's not like the mob fighting for territory, right? Your daycare can be right next to my daycare
In the
because
same building,
right.
apparently.
You want to hear it gets better.
Okay, it gets better. All right.
So then the ambassador for Somalia to the UN
Uh-huh.
so happens to be associated with some of the daycares in Ohio.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it keeps unfolding. The layers of fraud is astounding. So then they found out a lot of this money that they were laundering, they sent back overseas to Somalia.
Which is a divided country, lest we forget.
I don't know the history there.
After our unhappy,
Act of war.
which did not have congressional approval. The president is overwhelming. It's just a perfectly asinine argument. The president always has to have congressional approval. But anyway, after our ill-considered act of war to do good in Somalia, the country never came back together again.
Mm-hmm.
So part of Somalia does not recognize the authority of the ludicrous government in Mogadishu and christens itself Somaliland. Only Israel has recognized Somaliland because of an ongoing superstition among foreign policy types that if we recognize that a country has split up, we're running the risk of other countries splitting up. Who the hell cares? Czechoslovakia split up. Has anyone really suffered? And Somaliland seems to be a going concern. So, yes, if you're the rump Somalia headquartered in Mogadishu, you no longer control most of your impoverished country. You need to get dollars from somewhere.
And word will get around that there are federal programs that are cash cows.
Yes. But the Americans, those peculiar people, having done whatever the heck they thought they were doing in the early 90s, they are now quite prepared to fire vast amounts of money in your general direction.
Out of a sense of guilt.
I think that partly explains why there was no supervision oversight. I think that partly explains it.
Because supervision and oversight implies some sort of inherent racism.
That's probably how they felt. It implies we don't trust you completely. Of course we don't trust you completely. No government agency can completely trust the people with whom it does business.
Their clients,
It has some verification, some oversight. This was partly just a sense of guilt that we stumbled around in Somalia without really knowing what we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
So going back earlier, it's something I feel quite strongly about, as you noticed. When I say the executive may engage in acts of war without congressional approval, and when I say quite accurately that there's abundant, mountainous precedent for this, I don't mean to say that's always wise. Sometimes he judges poorly, as Bush did in Somalia.
Right.
But he did not need congressional approval.
Right. The existence of mistakes does not prove the invalidity of the system.
Exactly.
Which?
Military action, act of war of limited scope and duration. The executive does not need congressional approval, as opposed to state of war,
Right.
national effort.
But for the subsidizing of daycares, perhaps it would be wise if there was congressional approval. You want to run?
Congressional approval. They approved the budget,
Right. Yeah.
and they approved the poorly structured program. Well, the budget is so complex that no human being, this is not to blame the congressmen and senators. It's so complex that no human being can master the miserable thing.
It's like accountants, they say pretty much everyone has made tax fraud because there's 2 million pages of tax code.
But no human being, excellent, first-rate accountant I know, talked about being at a conference when he was relatively new in the field, being shocked when the presenters said, if I wanted to, I could find reason. I wanted to conduct an investigation of your activities. I could find reason to charge any of you with violations of the tax code. And of course, all the people at the conference were shocked and they gasped. But he proceeded to explain, tax code is so complex that no single accountant can grasp it. A whole team of accountants has to be at work for anyone who has complicated business. And even then, they are going to miss things. His suspicion was, being of a paranoid turn of mind, that it's designed to be so complex that if the government really wants to get you, it will find reason to get you. Let me say something else medieval. That was part of politics in 15th century Florence. Investigating your political opponent's taxes. And in a 15th century sort of way, which is nothing like a 21st century sort of way, the 15th century Italian Renaissance sort of way, Florence had a complicated tax code. So if someone was really determined, if the people in power, say the Medici, were really determined to bring you down,
To keep you out of power.
keep you out of it, they would have a detailed investigation of your tax payments, and they would find something.
Because of course they would find something.
Of course they would find something.
Right. The only way you could avoid having something found is if you spent your whole life trying to find every tax you could conceivably pay.
Your affairs were so simple and so modest that you could keep track of them. In which case, they're so simple and so modest, you were not a threat to the Medici.
Sure.
Florence is an example of, I argue, I think by broad definition of democracy, the Italian communes of the 13th century were democratic regimes. If we're willing to call ancient Athens a democracy, we need to call the communes of 13th century Italy a democracy. They're democracies. In almost every case, democracy failed because of lack of political and social stability. Lack of political and social stability not unrelated to the degeneration of the Guelph and Ghibelline parties into being merely oppositional to each other. The main exception was Florence, which endured as nominally a democracy, but really a lost state. Medici ran the show. They manipulated the levers of power. Lorenzo, the Magnificent, it was a tour de force. He was able to do this without having any public office whatsoever. None, no public office whatsoever. But every foreign ambassador knew that your real conversation was going to be with Lorenzo. They mastered the levers of power, and one of those levers was the investigation for tax fraud. Because if you really wanted to find something, you'd find something.
Right.
And levy a heavy fine, crushing fine on the political opponents. While declaring, no one is above the law.
Another sad example
Yes.
of corruption among our young.
So we have to prove it breaks my heart to crush this dignified family.
Mm.
But we have to prove that breath, wipe away the tear, no one is above the law.
Save Lorenzo
Save Lorenzo,
and his inner circle.
who made the law without any public office whatsoever, a tour de force. Couldn't last. There was resentment in Florence.
Mm.
And after Lorenzo died, his heir was not able to keep up the act, and people were frustrated anyway. There was a popular uprising led by
The mob?
Savonarola.
Ah.
Girolamo de Savonarola, popular uprising connected with religious revival.
Hmm.
So kicking out the Medici went hand in hand with reviving the moral and spiritual life of Florence.
Okay, what that does demonstrate, though, is that if you want to remain in power, you generally have to share some of it.
Oh, good. That's very good. That's very good. That's an absolute truth in politics. Absolute truth. To remain in power, you have to be willing to share. Undisguised one-man rule. Always, always produces resentment and resistance.
Hmm.
You have to be willing to share your power. Have some judgment about with whom you share it. But yeah, you have to be willing to share. It's paradoxical. But to keep power, you have to be willing to share it.
Right. How many organizations have been brought down by, be it a governor or a president or a king or a CEO who just can't, yeah, bishop or pope, who can't let go.
Can't let go. Has to centralize everything.
Mm.
Cannot share.
Wow.
Has to be the one in charge. All the time.
It's a lot to think about. We'll come back. We got more questions. Let's take a quick break.
By the way, that
Oh.
will break your health fairly early.
It'll also break your health. Yeah. Are we off or should we?
Shakespeare.
Perfect. Are we back on? Okay. Padre, by popular acclaim, your sequence on Father James's 1 minute, sorry, 1 minute of reactions to movies is back. We got to do it again. We're back for round two. We have to switch up the rules a little bit this time. There are a number of movies that the world wants to know. The world wants to know, how do these movies stack up on both historical accuracy and then your overall sense of their worthiness. Okay.
I'm weaker on that point, right? I'm not going to try to pose as a movie critic, although I have opinions.
Well, okay. All right. Well, that's all we want, honestly. All right. So we'll set the timer.
Let's talk qualifications.
Yeah. We're going to set the timer. Where's my clock? For 12 seconds.
12 seconds.
12 seconds. Okay.
Gee.
Mm-hmm. So you'll have 5 seconds to think silently, and then 12 seconds to give us your brief, either your exaltation or the elaboration of your derision.
But much elaboration, not much room for elaboration.
Not in 12 seconds.
Nope.
All right. So Tom's going to have the timer. Okay. So we're going to go roughly in historical order. Roughly in historical order. We're going to name the movie. You'll have 5 seconds to just consider your answer, and then 12 seconds to elaborate either your praise or your disapprobation. Yeah, perfect one. And I'm gonna. So most of these, we've talked about. I do have one curveball.
Curveball.
One curveball thrown in there for you. We'll save it for the end. So, okay. All right, Tom, we're ready. 5 seconds. I think we'll just have to count that off and then hit the timer for 12. Yeah. All right, you'll give us a buzz. You'll give us a beep.
Yeah.
Your father's getting ready to go into the ring. Okay. No, we'll get rolling here too. Let's see. We start in the. Oh shoot, we didn't check. Dan. Ah man, I don't want to name the movies because I'm going to spoil the surprise. We're just.
For soul.
I know. Okay, Dances with Wolves.
All right. Visually spectacular it was as a piece of history. What can I say? Nothing is more absurd than trying to depict the historical Dakota as peace-loving. They have all the virtues, and vices of a warrior society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Remember, you have 5 seconds to consider before we start the 12-second
Give
response.
that one away.
Yes, I did. All right. Gods and generals.
Solid history, a little bit lugubrious as a movie. Some people accuse it of being pro-Southern. I thought it was even-handed, which of course some people consider inappropriate. But I thought it was quite even-handed and accurate.
Okay. Next up, Four Feathers.
There's been more than one production of Four Feathers. That's a slight difficulty, but basically it's a
We'll give you 24 seconds.
basically it's a Victorian hero yarn, and it says something about the sort of virtues and vices that made Victorian Britain a warrior culture in almost the same, in a comparable way to Afghanistan or the Sioux. It was a warrior culture.
Wow. That's good. Okay. All right. Sergeant York.
Sergeant York is a great classic American film. Gary Cooper's at his most splendid, and it illustrates beautifully the tensions of a genuine Christian conscience when confronted by the brutal realities of war. You are, in fact, killing people.
Incredible story.
Incredible story.
It was 135?
An officer is supposed to say, York, you were supposed to capture the whole German army. And York very simply said, well, not the whole army, just a few more than 100.
Tora.
Marvelous effort to present for the general public the history of Pearl Harbor. As a movie, it's not very dramatic. It is dramatized history. So don't look for any romantic interest and don't look for any surprise endings. We know the history. It displays the history very well for a general audience.
Pearl Harbor.
All right, I call for my whiskey. I take a sip. How can you possibly take something as dramatic as Pearl Harbor and make it boring? There it is.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, I love it. Okay. Let's see. Where are we? Enemy at the Gates.
Powerful and depressing. It captures the ugliness, the supreme ugliness, the Battle of Stalingrad, most horrible battle in all of history. It captures the ugliness of the Nazi regime. It captures the ugliness of the Stalin regime. If you're prepared for a thoroughly dramatic and deeply depressing experience, watch it.
Enemy at the Gates is for you. All right. Let's see.
Both very collectivist, but not warm.
Right. Bridge too far.
Much like Tora, with a slight effort to be more dramatic, but it depicts the last significant German victory in the Second World War, a defensive victory, but a solid one, depicts it for the general audience, what went wrong with the Allied effort. It's not going to have any romantic interest, not character development. It's a history lesson, but in a dramatic way, and I think people would enjoy it. Incredible cast, by the way.
Incredible cast. Black Hawk Down.
Edward's family. It is powerful. It is, as far as I know, accurate. It is not grim, but gritty, if I can use that expression. It captures war without, it seems to me, without moralizing or romanticizing. You can't simply call it anti-war film, but it's also not an ordinary action adventure flick. It's rough and it's sad. And if you make a war movie, it damn well better be sad. He's dealing with people getting killed and things ruined.
Hmm.
And even if it's necessary, it's sad.
12 Horsemen.
It's very sad.
Hmm.
Again, not gloomy. Enemy at the Gates might be gloomy. Not gloomy, but you feel the magnitude of the thing.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the inescapable dilemmas people were in.
Mm-hmm.
And feeling those inescapable dilemmas makes one a little less quick to moralize, judge. Maybe they were doing about the best they could in that situation. How would you have done?
Wise words. Oh, and that's our list. Yeah.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Good movies this time.
I was about to say, I was really hoping for a few more,
Horrible.
few more sacrifices on the altar of sarcasm.
Nope. Pearl Harbor. That's not a horrible. No movie in that list is horrible.
Hmm.
Apart from that.
Pearl Harbor. Yeah.
Yeah, the Four Feathers, both versions, just classic Victorian adventure yarn. It's an amazing thing to think about the effects of World War I in transforming the British personality. Adventurous spirit, the warrior spirit, for good and ill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Virtues and vices. But the warrior spirit of Victorian Britain blew itself to bits. Massive catastrophe in the First World. It still haunts the British psyche, no question.
Mm-hmm.
French psyche.
What did we do?
Illustration that the illustration. More so than World War II in a way. World War II is more destructive, but graver and more dangerous issues were involved.
So it was more coherent as a.
Coherent as a story, yes. That's why we keep going back to it.
Mm-hmm.
More coherent as a story. World War I was such the illustration that the warrior spirit joined to modern technology. A recipe for catastrophe.
Mm-hmm.
The warrior spirit, when Britain was looking at various imperial adventures, is one thing. Warrior spirit, major war in Europe was quite another.
Mm-hmm. Is it true to say that, in a way, the modern powers had toys they didn't even know how to play with?
Absolutely, unquestionably. Unquestionably, it's a minor marvel. That's not a minor marvel. It's a major marvel that no power has hauled up the nuclear tool since 1945. I'm so impressed by that because up to that point, the record was great powers of the world would use everything in their toolbox, and they could not control their tools. World War I and World War II, the war took on a dynamic of its own. People could almost not help being more and more destructive.
Thinking, well, it's because the other guy
Yes.
will be destructive to us.
Yes, steady escalation. The Germans were the first to attempt to bomb civilian populations in Warsaw, Rotterdam, London. 1,000-plane Allied bombing of Hamburg, bar bombing of Tokyo, bar bombing of Dresden. Horrific escalation of horror. We were not controlling our toys. Toys were controlling us. Weird sort of way, the two atomic bombs are almost anticlimactic. That seems very strange to say, but you had already firebombed Tokyo. You already blasted Berlin to bits. You already had so much horror. All that like conventional high explosives. Moral frontier had crossed. Yes, it has.
The moral frontier of destroy the other side, no matter what, no matter who's on the other side.
What did you have to do to end the war?
Mm-hmm.
We did have to. Again, World War II has a coherence that World War I does not.
Mm-hmm.
It's a much more, if you can use this expression, attractive story. Enemy at the Gates is a reminder, however, that there's one great huge twist in the simple tale of good guys versus bad guys. The West, basically the good guys, though with some significant lapses. The West, basically the good guys, only defeated Nazi Germany. Definitely the bad guy. Only defeated Nazi Germany by partnership. It's communist Russia,
Mm-hmm.
which in terms of badness is almost as bad. Maybe the Gates brings that up. That was the biggest land struggle of the war.
Mm-hmm.
Germany versus Russia. By far the nastiest. It's almost entirely without.
Russia lost 25 million people in World War II.
2025. Beyond quantification.
25 million people.
2025.
That would be the population of Miami, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and at least one, and Baltimore.
And that was on the heels of the state-enforced famine in Ukraine and Kazakhstan, which claimed a few million, on the heels of the ethnic cleansing of Poles, on the heels of the Great Purge, on the heels of the horrors of enforced collectivization. Oh, the warmth of the collective.
Right.
The horrors of enforced collective farming, the breaking of the whole class of small independent farmers, so everyone could be forced onto the collective farms. All of those put together produced several million deaths. And all of that on the heels of the Russian Civil War, which killed several million people. That on the heels of World War I. So what Russia and the associated nationalities went through in 1914, and honestly, the death of Stalin in 1953, what they went through beggars imagination.
For 40 years.
Yeah.
One catastrophe after another.
Humanly induced catastrophe.
Gosh. It's so troubling.
And so, of course, they're warped cultures. Of course. The trauma of Britain induced by World War I is great. Consider the trauma induced by all that. Never recover. May never recover. In our better moments, we Americans realize how fortunate we've been.
Mm-hmm.
And darn well we should.
We've not suffered too many national traumas.
Not like that.
We've suffered tragedies.
Tragedies, certainly. Human-induced catastrophes. Civil War, catastrophe, but not like World War I, shadowing in some ways, but not like the Russian Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
Not like mass brutality of forced collective farming.
Mm-hmm. Who was doing the enforcing, and how were those people getting fed?
People with the guns came and gathered the crops. Crops from the farmers, let the farmers starve.
Because next year there'll be more farmers, right?
Yeah, at some point you have to stop doing that.
Right.
That was to force them on their collective farms. And also, in order to make sure that Stalin's dream for modernizing the Soviet Union was heavy industry. So the workers of heavy industry had to be kept fed.
Mm-hmm.
So if all you saw the Soviet Union of the late 20s and 30s, if all you saw was Moscow and you were determined to like it, you could convince yourself to like it. If you took the trouble to travel outside Moscow and see people starving to death in the countryside, it was happening too much to be concealed, then you saw the truth of it. The New York Times, which has been a rag for a very long time, the New York Times insisted on publishing stories that indicated the Soviet experiment was succeeding all the time when people were dying by the millions. But the New York Times reporter never bothered to venture outside of Moscow.
Our man in Moscow.
Our man in Moscow never bothered to venture outside Moscow except on carefully supervised tours, in which he encountered the old Russian tradition of the Potemkin village, carefully prepared to impress him. The more adventurous British journalist Malcolm Muggeridge traveled in the countryside, and he wrote home about the horror. The British left never forgave him.
They didn't believe him and then didn't forgive him? Or they believed him and didn't forgive him for breaking the spell?
Saw the truth of it, pretended they didn't believe it. How does this happen? Well,
how does this happen?
Spanish Civil War. John Dos Passos and Ernest Hemingway were friends when the thing started. They both went over to support the leftist side in the Spanish Civil War. There was a civil war within the Civil War as the communists attempted to crush the anarchists on the leftist side. And they were quite brutal about it. John Dos Passos wanted to write about this. Ernest Hemingway said no, because that would damage cause, that is to say, the leftist cause in Spain. So yes, the important thing is that the progressive cause be exalted. And therefore some inconvenient details, like brutal murder behind the lines. John Dos Passos never spoke to Ernest Hemingway again after this. So,
how is Hemingway was able to prevent him from publishing anything?
Did his best.
Did his best.
Because nothing must sully the cause. It was his experience in Spain that caused George Orwell. He never ceased being basically a man of the left.
Mm-hmm.
But he became a fiercely anti-communist man of the left.
Mm-hmm.
I can only imagine what he would say about the warmth of the collective. But his experience in Spain that caused him to become a fierce anti-communist.
Oh my gosh.
Civil war within the Civil War. The nationalist side won in Spain for various reasons. One of them is it was a unified force. They all accepted the leadership of Francisco Franco. They had different ideas, but they accepted his leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the so-called Republican side was bitterly, not just bitterly, murderously divided.
Against each other. Whereas Franco, at the very least, everyone respected him. No one liked him.
Hard man to like. Man to like. He was very focused, unemotional.
Mm.
The story goes that he was at his desk when the last Republican forces surrendered, and he received the news of victory, and he's supposed to have looked up and said, "Muy bien," and then returned to his paperwork.
Mm.
Not an easy man to like.
Huh.
But a man to respect.
Right. Did he ever marry? Did he have children?
I believe so.
Okay.
I've been over the Spanish Civil War.
Okay.
Just to mind for some time, about which I have a board game.
All right. He's got a board game for it. We already run short on time, but there's one topic that we need to get to. We've talked a little bit about spheres of influence, and I think it would be really interesting to, with the events.
Difference there, right? I am convinced that a rational foreign policy recognizes spheres of influence.
Okay. Can you just give your definition of sphere of influence?
Sphere of influence is recognizing that powerful states are going to exercise influence in their neighbors. That doesn't mean carte blanche, they can do anything they want, but they're going to have a legitimate concern in what the heck goes on in their neighbors.
Beyond their own borders.
Their own borders. Mm-hmm. Because obviously what happens across the border is going to affect you. Clearly, it'd be absurd to argue otherwise. So great powers have a sphere of influence. I regard that as axiomatic. The normal, I call it the Star Trek Next Generation foreign policy school, thinks they're already working with Captain Jean-Luc Picard. They don't believe in such things. No, we have a rules-based international order. And, to keep going with television shows, they think that what you do, if there's an international problem, you have, again, I liked the first version of Law and Order, you have the detectives Briscoe and Green go and investigate, and they have to get proper authorization from Judge Pufflepuff, and then maybe they talk to whoever the district attorney is, and then they go to Judge Humblebug, who can give you an arrest warrant, and a dramatic trial happens. That's not how international affairs work. There are great powers that have actual muscle, and they have both a right and a responsibility to pay attention to what happens in their neighborhood. I do not believe that there's been any reality to the power of the United Nations. It's useful as a forum where people can get together and bloviate. Bloviating has to be done. It has to be done.
Doesn't sound necessary when we call it bloviating.
It's need to put things on record. But you have to take what they put on record with more than one grain of salt. This is being said for public consumption. It was an evil joke, not an evil joke. It was a good joke in the 80s. That if there's much alarm, and justified alarm, about the leftist regime in Nicaragua and its determination to export revolution. The joke was that if the American Marines invaded Nicaragua and overthrew that regime, the president of Mexico in the morning would give a fierce speech denouncing Yankee imperialism, and in the evening he would be on his knees thanking God for the existence of the U.S. Marines. So bloviating, states have to put things, governments have to put things on record to placate constituencies, has to be done. The United Nations is a decent place to do that. There needs to be a forum for it, fine. Real power is still exercised by nation states. And their concern about what happens in their neighbors is not just justified, it's responsible. They can't ignore it. So I tend to think of the world as divided into necessarily loose spheres of influence, and potential trouble arises mostly when those overlap, as they do in the Western Pacific. Our sphere, China's spheres overlap. You just have to be cautious about that. Recognize they've got an interest. We've got an interest. Nobody push too hard. If you recognize spheres of influence, I think you're less likely to engage in imprudent acts of war that might lead to states of war.
I want to get to some questions about some very, very clear areas where this is of utmost concern. Ukraine, Venezuela. But before I do that, I want to talk about something like China and India, where you have these two enormous, powerful nations who are the neighbors.
Yes.
How is it the same thing where you just have to be really cautious?
Happily, they're largely separated by the Himalayas, but there was a nasty little border war in 1962, which China won hands down. It was a somewhat entertaining episode because the Indian government had done much bloviating about American imperialism, but they got so badly whipped by the Chinese that they asked us if we could help in case the Chinese didn't stop. now didn't need another Korean War. So he grabbed the disputed territory and stopped.
And said, good enough.
But that's a that's an unresolved issue. India has never recognized what happened. Basically, it was not territory that anybody in India is going to sweat too much about.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they're pretty much separated by the Himalayas. But
Mm-hmm.
Pakistan is India's neighbor, an unhappy neighbor, with whom India, depending on how you do the counting, with whom India has fought 3 or 4 wars.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not since the 70s, thankfully, not since 71. But the territorial issues remain unresolved.
Mm.
Cultural tension is there. Pakistan is not a great power, not a minor one, but not a great power. India is a great power. Temptation is for Pakistan to connect to a great power. Protection. And that great power they connect to might overcommit to Pakistan. Get dragged into conflict with India. At this point, Pakistan's natural choice for a great power partner would be China. I think China would be ill-advised. Frankly, I think one should recognize Pakistan as in India's sphere of influence.
Uh-huh.
Gives it a carte blanche to do what they want, basically. Yeah.
You wish that
India's interests need to be respected.
when they come to you hat in hand, you say, oh, of course, we wish you all the best. And of course, we support all of your efforts towards. Right. And of course, we support all of your efforts towards self-actualization and self-rule. Yeah.
And domestic harm.
Right.
But we're not going to arm you against China. They're not going to arm you against India.
Right.
It's similar in the case of Taiwan. Overlapping influence. We handle that.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very delicately. So you don't start building American bases in Taiwan, but you have enough of an American presence to know that a Chinese invasion would be a risky gamble.
Uh-huh.
You don't put American bases there. China doesn't feel threatened. Similar with Korea. Basically, North Korea is China's sphere of influence. It's a really annoying country, like a sliver under your fingernail. Really annoying country. Not going to do anything about it. It's China's sphere. And as long as the Chinese understand that they need to let the North Koreans know you don't do anything stupid.
Mm-hmm.
If you launch an invasion of South Korea, you're on your own this time.
Uh-huh. Right, but you actually have to go to your rival, the Chinese, and say, look, you need to let them know.
We're not going to do it. We're not ever going to talk about regime change in North Korea. That's your sphere of influence.
Right.
What happens there, I can leave it up to you.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of the coin is...
You have to manage this.
Yes.
You have to manage this daycare.
Yes. Good luck with that, because they're not entirely sane.
Right.
So, the Korean War was ended on, in my view, I mean, peace treaty was never signed, was it? But Korean Wars ended on simple, very sensible. I like simple and very sensible sphere of power, sphere of influence terms.
Mm-hmm.
Chinese have a legitimate interest. They don't want American troops in the Chinese border. So we're not going to attempt again to unify Korea. On the other hand, we have a natural interest. The West Pacific, it's our sphere of influence. We're not going to allow China to have any bases within striking range of Japan. So they stayed with South Korea.
Mm.
That's worked pretty well since 1953. I say pretty well, obviously.
Mm.
That is far from perfect. But building wars, it's nothing to sneeze at.
Right.
So I trust is not the right word. I think it's realistic to think in sphere of influence terms. and not frankly, think primarily in terms of sphere of influence and only secondarily in terms of rules-based international order. I don't want to be too nasty about that. I think it has to be considered that it's subordinate to the sphere of influence.
How do you apply that thinking to Ukraine?
God help us. God help everyone. God help us, everyone. That's a dangerous one. That's people I know and respect are makes so angry at me. People I know and respect would be very angry at me. I said I really thought.
Mm.
When all is said and done, Ukraine is next to Russia, and we are far away. At most, it's not. At best, it's an overlapping sphere of influence, not between the United States and Russia. We have no natural national interest in Ukraine.
Mm.
We do have some interest in letting Central Europe know that Russian aggression into Central Europe will not be tolerated. But at best, Ukraine is an overlapping sphere of influence between Russia and France, Germany, France. The European Union, it basically means Europe and France, with Britain kind of dancing around on the outside, not quite sure what it wants to do.
Not sure whether or not it wants to be in the ballroom.
Yeah, especially a ballroom that's run by the French and the Germans.
Mm.
The Italians there too, and they're content to let the French and the Germans run the ballroom as long as they don't give too many orders to the Italians.
And pay for everything.
Pay for everything.
Right. We'll let you run we'll let you run the party as long as you also pay for the party.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
The French and the Germans, in their different ways, they think they need to be, and perhaps do need to be. Europe is not. It's not reasonable to say that Europe will always be something of an American satellite. So if people in the West, if there is a Western sphere of influence that extends into Ukraine, it's not an American sphere of influence, but a German-French sphere of influence. But it's also in the Russian sphere of influence. It's overlapping.
Mm-hmm.
And no settlement can be done there without recognizing Russia's national and natural interest in Ukraine not being a base for foreign military activity. When you talk about security guarantees, you have to be very careful about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just Putin. We want to reduce it to personalities. No Russian government could or should. It's a strong word. No Russian government could or should tolerate foreign troops on the ground, Ukraine, on Russia's border. Potential base for an invasion of Russia, and Russia's had enough invasions over the years. So there, I think, perhaps an overlapping sphere of influence of only secondary interest to the United States. And there, it made people I like and respect furious at me, most likely. There it is. It's not a natural interest to the United States. It might provide some backing, but no acts of war, let alone state of war.
Mm-hmm.
And it's for Ukraine itself, but in terms of great powers, it's for Russia to work out with Germany, France, how Ukraine can be recognized as in the sphere of influence of both. Not a Russian satellite. Not right next to Russia. Russia has a concern with what goes on there. Particular, troops.
Including advisors. Or would you say including advisors?
I would say that. If you need advisors, then send your Ukrainian troops outside the country for training. But to be very careful about foreign troops in Russia and Ukraine.
Right. You might send them to England or Florida to get trained, but then you send them back by themselves.
And I'm from believer. So honestly, I think it is more likely to preserve peace. And I'm amazed that more people haven't grasped the genuinely imperialist overtones and undertones of rules-based international order. Who's the police?
You're a local friendly empire.
Exactly, your local friendly empire. Rules-based international order implies an international imperial power. For a while in the 90s, some people thought that it'd be the United States. That's done. It's more than we could take, more than we could handle. The world's too big for us. More than we could handle, and in the end, more than we wanted to.
Hmm.
And more than we could. So there are imperialistic overtones to this rules-based international order. Somebody's going to be.
No one's willing to say it, but
nobody's
if you press them and they were honest and logical, they might realize, oh, wait a minute, we do need if we make the whole world the block, we need a policeman to walk the beat.
Exactly. And it's too much for any power to assume without creating an empire.
Mm-hmm.
Empire building is a bloody business.
Mm. And empire maintaining is a semi-bloody business.
And the empires take constant maintenance.
Mm.
The natural, like I said this earlier, as you know, natural tendency of a building is to fall apart. You've experienced that.
Ugh.
Natural tendency of an empire is to fall apart. It's endless labor.
Mm.
It's as the line from Princess Bride goes. You got to try running the world.
Mm.
It's endless work.
It is endless work. It's exhausting.
So I think is both paradoxically more peaceful and more effective. I think primarily in terms of great power spheres of influence, and only secondarily in terms of rules-based international order.
Subsidiarity strikes again.
Subsidiarity strikes again. Peace is better preserved by great powers than by the global hegemon. Seriously. The fantasy that America was the global hegemon of the 90s led to the unpleasantness of the 2000s. Uneasy lies the head of the hegemon.
And it is uneasy because we don't understand other cultures and we don't understand other regions of the world.
Understand them. Max Hastings' wonderful book about the Vietnam War has a passage where an older man looking back to his youth, Vietnamese man, talks about his visceral reaction to American soldiers playing on the beach. Just playing. Nothing sinister. These big, muscular, black and white, these big, muscular foreigners acting like they owned the beach. It's this visceral reaction. That's what goes with being a hegemon. You try to be the policeman, you send your troops all over the place, and they just irritate people.
Interesting. So wow. So that
You're
line of
people
thinking
that-
brings us right back to Caracas.
They were just playing on the beach.
Ah.
But they're foreigners acting like they own our place. So that's when it comes to no American boots on the ground. Don't think that's necessary.
No boots on the beach.
It's on the beach. No bare feet on the beach. No playing on the beach.
Right.
Just I go back to the British Second Afghan War. British intervened in Afghanistan very forcefully, removed the current leadership, loosened things up, left with a clear message. We're not going to run Afghanistan. You have that pleasant task. Just make sure we will not tolerate you being a base for raiders against British India. We will not tolerate you having Russians coming in. So if you don't bring Russians in, if you don't make yourself a base for raids against British India, you do what you want.
You won't see us again.
You don't see us again. Now, if you want to go further than that and be a real partner with us, we've got goodies. But if you don't want to do that, that's fine. Just do not provide sanctuary for raids against us. Don't bring in weapons. I think we can and should something comparable if we spend money. If you want to go further, then just don't bring in the Russians and the Chinese. Don't play with terrorists. Don't sponsor narco traffic. We're going to go further than that and be a real partner. It has to be mutually advantageous, and you profit from it. But in any case, stick to those basics, and we won't have this kind of process again.
That's a good word. That's a lot to chew on. Well, Padre, it's always a pleasure to have you. Yeah, always a lot to think about, a lot to chew on.
Oh, it's fun.
Yeah, yeah. I like the axiomatic approach. What are the principles that govern our actions in a given situation?
Read the axioms. The sphere of influence axiom works better.
Well, we shall certainly see in times
We shall.
ahead. Very good. Thank you, Padre.
Yeah.
Good to see you.